Hello everyone and welcome back to my Bronte channel. Today we're going to dive into something really fascinating, something I've wanted to look into for a very long time. I want to look at the daily life of the Bronte sisters inside their home, the parsonage, back in the 1840s. We often hear about their incredible novels, but what was day-to-day life actually like for them all? So from early morning chores to evenings spent writing, the routine at the Brontë Parsonage gives us a glimpse into how Charlotte, Emily and Anne Bronte all lived. So join me as we explore the Bronte sisters' daily life and step inside the parsonage to see how they managed it all. So the day probably started at the parsonage, or at least for the servants, Tabby and Martha, quite early. They would be up before dawn, ready to tackle their daily tasks. I'm sure Tabby's internal body clock kept them on schedule. I mean, there was no alarm clocks back then, so she would have risen at the same time every day for years. First on their list was cleaning the hearths, bringing in the coal and the water, and basically getting the fires going. I mean, the fires were essential, not just to warm up the house, but to start preparing for breakfast. Breakfast would have been a simple meal, probably bread and butter, porridge and tea. Actually, that sounds like a very good idea to me. Patrick Brontë, the father of the household, often had his breakfast in his study, where he would spend time reading his Bible or reading letters or the local news. But I suspect the sisters, Anne Bramwell, would have been in the kitchen to keep warm and also listen to Tabby's gossip, while Keeper and Flossie probably hung about waiting for tidbits. After breakfast, the real work began. I mean, the Brontë sisters didn't spend all day writing like we would imagine they did. Far from it. They had things to do. Their mornings were filled with chores, and they were responsible for tidying the rooms, dusting, sweeping the floors, and probably helping prepare vegetables for dinner. Of course, Tabby and Martha handled the heavier duties, like bringing in the coal and the water, and of course washing the front step. Okay, I just need to explain this whole front step business. So for a very long time in Britain, and maybe other parts of the world, I don't know, I'm just going to talk about what I know, and probably women still do it today, a spotless front step was a must. Women often judged others' women's cleanliness by how clean their front step was. I know, a bit mad. And you would see women on their hands and knees scrubbing their front step every day because it was such a big deal. And I'm sure that it was for Tabby as well. Maybe she got Martha to do it, but I am sure it would have been done to her standards and would have been done every day. Anyway, back to it. So keeping the house running smoothly was a group effort with tasks that had to be done and repeated daily. Shopping for household essentials was often part of the Brontë sisters' routine. While Tabby took care of the heavy household work with Martha, Charlotte, Emily and Anne would sometimes be sent out to the shops on Main Street in Haworth to pick up small items like tea, sugar or candles. The post, though, wouldn't arrive until, say, late morning or early afternoon, and often bringing letters from friends and family, and sometimes, obviously, news from their publishers. I mean, this was an exciting part of the day. It was news from the outside world, and I'm sure they all look forward to it. As for Patrick, his days followed a fairly structured routine. After breakfast in his study, he would probably spend his mornings planning his sermons, reading or tending to correspondences. I mean, Patrick took his role as a clergyman very seriously, often visited his parishioners in the village, offering guidance or attending to their needs. He would also make regular visits to the church, which was just a short walk from the parsonage. And of course, there would have been a lot of funerals and a lot of christenings to do over his time in Haworth. So in Yorkshire, what we now call lunch was traditionally referred to as dinner, and it was the main meal of the day, and it's still referred to that here now. I think I've mentioned it before in one of my videos. Served around about noon, the meal often featured hearty dishes like meat and potatoes and vegetables. And cooking during the day made so much more sense, as daylight made kitchen work that much easier. I mean, by contrast, preparing meals in the evening was far more challenging, especially by candlelight or oil lamp. Plus, the fires were stoked and going strong in the mornings, making it more efficient to get all the cooking and inevitably all the washing up done during the day. But after dinner, the sisters would then have a bit more time for themselves. Afternoons were dedicated to creativity. After dinner, Charlotte, Emily and Anne could finally turn their attentions to writing or reading, unless there was sewing and clothes that needed mending, of course. I mean, maintaining the family wardrobe and repairing household items was just as important as the literature pursuits, but maybe not as much fun. It's incredible to think that some of the world's greatest novels were crafted right there in the afternoon between chopping up vegetables and doing sewing. Mad, isn't it? Wash days were typically once a week, often on a Monday. This was a tradition all around the UK. Women all did their washing on a Monday. And it was hard, physically demanding. Clothes had to be scrubbed by hand in large tubs with bars of soap, and the water had to be heated over the fire, a process that could probably take hours and sometimes stretch into the afternoon. Once everything was cleaned, drying the clothes became another challenge. If the weather was bad, which it often is, they'd have to hang the laundry indoors, which made the whole process that much more difficult. The Brontë family were lucky to have outdoor space for drying their clothes at the parsonage. Many people in Haworth didn't have that luxury, what with the houses being back to back, and they would drape their laundry over the gravestones in the churchyard during the day to dry. Could you imagine that? Taking along your bed sheets and hanging them over Uncle Tony's gravestone. Sorry, Uncle, just drying out my sheets. I can't quite see how they would have been very clean afterwards either, but never mind. Changing the bed sheets, which today seems quite an easy enough thing to do, was no small task back then. Imagine the amount of sheets from 7 people's beds, and then imagine washing 7 sets of bed sheets. It must have been awful. Some days at the parsonage were busier than others. In addition to the regular morning chores, there were the deeper cleaning tasks like polishing the brass and candlesticks, a task that had to be done every few weeks to keep everything gleaming. Scrubbing the floors were another major job, often done weekly, especially in high traffic areas like the kitchen and the hallway. The stone floors in particular needed a good scrub to remove all that dirt and muck that was tracked in from the village. I tried to think what else was on the floor, to be honest. Aside from the daily and weekly tasks, there were plenty of occasional jobs that kept the household running smoothly. All those windows in the parsonage needed to be cleaned, particularly after bad weather, though this wasn't done as frequently as we might do it today, or hardly frequently, if it's me. Another key job was blackening the hearth, a messy but essential task to keep them looking neat and preventing soot from building up. Too much soot could catch on fire, and we all know how much Patrick was nervous of house fires. The ironwork around the fireplaces had to be regularly polished too. So on clearer days, the sisters would take a break and probably head out for a walk in the afternoon, often wandering the moors that inspired so much of their work. This was their chance to get some fresher away from Haworth probably, and gather inspiration. But after their walks, it was back to writing and finishing probably more daily tasks. By 6 p.m, it was time for tea, the lighter evening meal. Yes, I know there are cups of tea and there is a meal called tea, and it's very confusing, but somehow we all seem to know what the difference is when we talk about it. I have no idea how, but anyway, you'll get it, I promise. Keep following me and you will get there. This light meal would consist of probably cold meats, cheese and bread, and of course, a good cup of tea. The family would sit together discussing the events of the day or things that they've read in the newspaper, and this would be in the dining room. But I can imagine Patrick often found his children's chatter and that constant teasing that siblings do quite difficult to stand. The evenings were when the Brontë sisters did some of their best writing, often working into the night. But for Patrick, his day ended that bit earlier. Probably between 9 and 9:30, he would take himself off to bed. A well-known part of his nightly routine, of course, was winding the famous clock located halfway up the stairs, and it's still there today. He did this every evening to ensure that the house kept perfect time. Branwell, on the other hand, was a bit more unpredictable. He often came home late and trying to slip in quietly, but we can only imagine how many times he disturbed the peace of the house and probably woke all the dogs up at the same time. Dusting, sweeping the floors and probably helping prepare the vegetables for dinner. How many times have I said probably? And we know Charlotte was a big writer-letter? Occasional jobs that needed to keep there. So there we have it, a glimpse into the daily life of the Brontë sisters inside the parsonage in the 1840s. I mean, their days were filled with chores and writing and family routines, all of which created this environment that led them to their extraordinary literature achievements. I mean, it's wonderful to think about. There they are, famous writers, and yet they're peeling potatoes. So thank you for watching. If you like this video, please do that whole likey, subscribey thing because it really does help me out. And of course, it lets YouTube know that we want to watch more Brontë content. So if you fancy buying me a brew, I've set up a coffee account. The info's in the description below, but I'll also put some information up here for you. Yes, I have a tea going on. Thank you to everyone that has already donated money to my coffee account. At this rate, I'm going to be drinking tea for many years, but that's not such a bad thing. So thank you again. I am very, very grateful. Have a good weekend, and I will see you all next Friday for more Brontë adventures. But if you can't wait that long, maybe watch one of these other videos. See you soon. Bye.